Hello friends, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Nick, and this is MSFS Flight Plans, where I am pretty sure we are very, very close to saving the world through flight simulation. All I need to do is try to figure out how we're going to do that. So a real quick personal story is a prequel to this flight over Huntsville, Alabama. I'm a financial guy during my day job. I think I probably mentioned that on some of our past flights, but I was meeting with a client last week who was telling me about her plans to move up here to Huntsville, and I was thinking, geez, Jacksonville, which is where I live now, Jacksonville, Florida, certainly isn't the best city in the world, but it's got to be better than living way up there in the sticks. So I asked what the draw was for her for Huntsville, and the first thing she said was, well, you know they have that SpaceCamp place up there. And as you can probably imagine, I didn't hear much else that she was talking about after that. While she was still speaking about maybe some other reasons she was going up there, I immediately opened my laptop and kind of Google and started checking out the satellite maps to see how it would look if we took a flight out here. I think I said that I had to look at some stock charts or something just so I wouldn't blow my cover. But it turns out there is a lot more than just the space camp out here, so we're going to give it a once-over. And as cool as the space stuff is at the space camp, I really couldn't find much else. Well, all the space stuff's pretty cool, and it's in a really tight area, so this one will probably qualify as a lunch break flight, which for those of you that are new to the channel is a trip we were going to try to keep our air time to 15 minutes or less that we're up in the air off the ground. And this whole trip is only 20 miles, which might still be pretty tough to squeeze it in under 15 minutes because this is a very cool but very slow vintage tail dragger. It is the CAP-4 Paulistinha, which I thought about taking for that Rio flight because it is a Brazilian plane. You can see they got the little Brazilian flag under the cockpit window there. But it would have been just too slow. That 407 is about twice as fast as this. I think this cruises around 80 knots maybe. And this is the live weather. It's a beautiful clear day, but it is windy. Every now and then we'll get a gust and you can actually see the wings rocking a little bit there. So before we hop in, I think, let's see, we got no chocks. We do have the pitot cover, so let's do that. And you can click on the door handle and you'll get in the plane. Look at the plane shaking. I don't think that's because I removed the pitot cover. It's not that heavy, though this is a very light plane. It's fabric coated. I'll tell you a little bit about the plane itself later. Look at that thing shaking around. Alright, everything is pre-configured. Let's go ahead and just already got the battery on, so we'll turn this stuff on. And I can't see ground mode on, altitude mode. We'll get that on. Obviously, we have no autopilot, so we're going to hand fly this, which will be a lot of fun. And let's take a look at the map real quick before we fire her up. So if you're not too sure where Huntsville is, and I wasn't either, I thought it was a little bit lower in the state, but it's right up along the southern border of Tennessee up there. So here's Jacksonville, and she's moving up here. And the area that we're going to fly from, this is photogrammetry, so is Decatur. Not sure why. There's not much going on in Decatur. But originally I was going to fly from Birmingham, which is pretty cool, and also photogrammetry. Or maybe even Tuscaloosa. That might be too, because I get the big university there. But anyway, this is way, way too far for this plane, and there's really nothing in between. So maybe we'll take another trip down there sometime. But what we're going to do is leave from the main airport right here, fly just less than 5 miles over to where all the space stuff starts, which is right over here. This is a big military base, the Redstone Arsenal. And then we'll just kind of cruise around the southern end of it here, and then all the space camp stuff is up here, and then we're going to land at the runway in the base. So again, I think it's 21 miles in total. And we'll see if we can get in. We're going to have a... Well, the wind is really shifting. This is going to be very turbulent. Just a second ago, the wind was coming from this direction at about 10 knots. Okay, so that'll be fun. Very interesting. Let's see how we do on this thing. Let me get this a little bit more stretched out over here on this side, because I will need to kind of track where we're going. If I can adjust it. There we go. There we go. And let me zoom just a little bit. Okay, that's good over there. Let me center the plane. And this doesn't have parking brakes, so you've got to step on the brakes. And I can't imagine trying to... So let's say you're landing with this thing. You know, usually you have your toe brakes on top of the rudders. But I'm guessing unless you're driving like a race car driver, like heel toe, I don't know how you would manipulate the brakes and the rudder pedals at the same time on this, but I guess people have figured out how to do it. But look at that. You'd really have to move your toes over there to get on those things. But as you're going to see, man, if you're having trouble with the tail dragger, let's start this up real quick. If you struggle to get tail draggers up and down off the runway, this is the plane for you. Something didn't work, and I know what it is. Forgot to click the magnetos back on. That'll do it. There we go. Once you see the sticky note disappear, you know you've done something right. And I think I can figure out this taxi, because that's the taxiway, and that'll take us to the end of the runway. But this thing is just an absolute dream to get up and down. But you got to go easy on that power while you're taxiing, because that tail will come up real quick. And once it does, no flopping around, no wig-wagging. And even though this is photogrammetry, because this plane is so very basic, you can turn the graphics way up. I do not have any add-ons installed. What you'll see is what you're going to get, which is kind of nice. And it looks pretty good. Not the best photogrammetry we've seen, but definitely not horrible either. We'll be able to tell what most of this stuff is. So we are leaving from Huntsville International, aka Carl T. Jones Field, and this place is not just a commercial airport, but also a spaceport used by a company called Sierra Space, which has designed a space plane that I'd never heard of before. I hadn't heard of the company either, but the space plane is called the Dream Chaser. And I read that last year they had a successful flight. It goes up on top of a conventional rocket. And I'm going to link a little 2-minute video I found on YouTube. Well, that's a little too slow. We must have that headwind now. Yeah, we do. It just stopped us. I might have to give it some back pressure. That tail's going to come up. So I'm going to link a little 2-minute video that's like a CGI video made by the company that kind of walks you through what it looks like and everything. But it is really neat. I think they had their first successful launch and recovery, aka landing, last year. Maybe even early this year. But they're planning on making a whole fleet of those things, and old Elon better watch out, because I think they've got SpaceX in their crosshairs with this project. But it looks really neat, and I think they're operating right out of this area here. Look at that. Look at that windsock. Oh, man. Yep, we got a tailwind now blowing us down here. This is going to be fun. And when we come into this airport, what I'll do is I'll just cut the power. I don't think you can get this thing to overspeed, even if you dive straight down. I tried to do it on the last flight. I'm going to have to give it the brakes. We're at almost idle right now. So I don't know if it's just unaerodynamic or what, but this thing just handles so well unless you get a really strong crosswind. So as we're coming in, I'll just cut the throttle and you can watch how it's going to blow us around. And here we go. So as soon as I'm going to give it full power, step on the brakes. As soon as I take up the brakes, then the tail's going to come right up. You'll have total control. No flaps on this thing. And as you're coming down, you could probably pull off a 2-point landing. I've tried a couple times. It'll stall probably sub, well, that's kilometers an hour, so sub 50 kilometers an hour on our airspeed indicator. The only problem is it's so light, it'll do a little bit of bouncing, but without the flaps to give it any additional lift. And now we're coming on the headwind. I got to power it up again. So when we taxi, when we're done, I'll just leave the tail up and we'll taxi down because it comes up so easily. Okay, now we've still got an 11-knot wind coming from 229, and this runway is oriented at about 180 degrees. So as soon as we get lined up, we'll give it the juice and go. I've still got full back pressure. If I took it off, I'm telling you that tail would come right up. Alright, and you really don't even have to mess with the trim either, and you can go full power without it overspeeding. It's great. Alright, here we go. Let's rock and roll. Take off the back pressure. Look at that. Tail's right up as soon as I took it off. Incredible. It's going to turn into that wind just a little bit here. So give it some left rudder, and up we go. So if we turn back the clock just a little bit, the first airport here in Huntsville opened its first 4 sod runways back in 1934, and that one's not here anymore. I think they built a bunch of residential areas over the top of where it was, but it was just south of downtown. And then Huntsville International, which is where we are now, opened in 1968 with none other than the OG of rocketry himself, Dr. Werner von Braun, in attendance. And you'll know why he showed up by the time we're done. And speaking of rockets, in just a few minutes, we're going to see... What we're going to do here is come to the end of this runway, which is over 12,000 feet long. It is big. And this dirt out here, by the way, at first I thought, man, that seems like it's like oversaturated. But when I was looking at the satellite maps, I don't know if it's that red, but it's pretty red. Must have a lot of iron content. Look how good the grass looks. We'll have a few patches of the blobs, but it's not nearly as bad as it was over in Rio. There's going to be one right up here on the left when we get to the end of this runway. The other runway, which is off to our left now, is a good bit shorter than this one. We're just going to come right to the end here and then take a left at the end of the runway, though, as I try to keep this thing under control. I think we'll probably have more turbulence to deal with once we turn towards the east, because right now it's still almost head-on. Yeah, we're up over 20 knots now. A steady 25 knots, it looks like. This will be fun. But the area where all the space stuff is today is called the Redstone Arsenal. And we're going to see that once we turn to the left. But that started life as a chemical manufacturing facility in World War II, and off to our right is where Decatur is, which is that other photogrammetry area. And I flew down along the Tennessee River, which we'll see in just a minute. It's a little bit hazy out here, isn't it? A little bit of fog. Well, in real life right now it'd be nighttime, so that's probably why it's foggy. I had to set it back a little bit because it's 10:45 here. In real time, there's the blob trees to the left. But I think they were doing some of the space manufacturing stuff over in Decatur, so if you keep going straight, you'll hit the Tennessee River, you can fly off to the right, but it doesn't look that great. There's not much out there anyway. There's a bunch of oil terminals or something right along the water, but not a lot, and the photogrammetry is not great. Okay, so we'll start this left-hand turn here. And then you could definitely VFR fly this. So once we get turned, we're going to see some big buildings sticking off to the left and just head towards those. That's where the space complex is. Okay, see them off there on the horizon? They're kind of obscured by this haze. So that's the direction we're going to go. But this place started life as a chemical manufacturing facility during World War II and was quickly converted to a rocket shop after they brought all the Nazi scientists over here during Operation Paperclip. I read they brought 150 of them out here. And the first projects were missiles based on the V2 design, rapidly scaling up to the multi-stage variety that they would use to launch humans into space. And that whole space launch project, it seems like most of the research was done out here until they actually started shooting stuff up in the air. And when they were testing some missiles, they brought the missiles to actually launch those over to White Sands range, a lot of them. A lot of residential areas out here. I'm guessing when they were doing all the rocket stuff back in the 40s and 50s, I bet none of this was out here. I think the population of Huntsville was around 8,000 back then. And as I'll tell you in a little bit, it's quite a bit bigger than that now. But a lot of those down to our right and left look like newer planned communities. And there's the Tennessee River over there to the right. You can see it winding through there. 652 miles long that thing is, running from Knoxville up into Kentucky, where it meets up with the Ohio River. But today, this Redstone Arsenal is a truly massive government conglomerate that includes the Department of Defense, the DOJ, FBI, NASA, ATF, along with around 70 other agencies. But getting back to the earlier history for a minute, before they were building rockets out here, the chemical plant was used to develop and produce chemical weapons. And yes, that was after they were banned in 1925, but there was some fine print associated with that. We could still use them in battle as long as someone else did it first, so we had to be ready to throw a little mustard on that dog, if you know what I mean. And yes, they were making mustard gas out here. But they were also making more conventional substances like tear gas, smoke-producing things, I don't know what you call that, and the napalm that was used in the firebombing of Japan. And then after the war, all the focus shifted to rocket propellants. And I was a little surprised to hear they did maintain a chemical weapons production facility out here all the way through the Korean War, making over 38 million artillery shells, though none were ever used. And it kind of makes you wonder what the heck happened to those. Probably wound up in Iraq. In addition to the ongoing space race during the Cold War, they also used this place to work on their nuclear launch capabilities, playing a significant role in the development of the Nike missile platform. Okay, the first thing we're going to see, which is right down off the left tip of our cowl there, we'll see a big structure sticking up. It's not the one in the distance, it's closer to us. That's called Test Stand 4670, which is where they were testing the massive Saturn V engines back in the 60s, and then later the engines for the Space Shuttle and Atlas rockets. And I was reading that whenever they would test those Saturn engines, it would feel like an earthquake for miles in every direction, which is not surprising considering each of them produced over 1.5 million pounds of thrust. And they were only about 5 miles from downtown here. But the stands have been vacant since '98, and now they're using it to test engines for Jeff Bezos' incredible flying penis. And he just had a flight with one of those filled with a bunch of women. Just perfect. But that's pretty cool. Not that he's launching flying penises from here, but the fact that they're using this site again. Right down there on the bottom, at the very bottom of it in the opening there, that's where the blast deflector is, so it's pointing towards us right now, and that's only 700 feet from those trees. Which I'm just guessing they've thought out in advance, but I hope they didn't. I'd love to see some trees get blown out of there. Alright, you see that little building down there with the blue roof? We'll see it better in just a second. That's called Building 4666, which is where von Braun and his team were working in the 1960s. And that was also in a state of disrepair, but I found the site of the company that's refurbishing it, and they're going to outfit it with 1960s decor when they're done, which is so amazing I can hardly even stand to think about it. And that really tall building right there is the dynamic test stand, and that was used to test both the Saturn V and Space Shuttle to see how much vibration it could handle without shaking itself to pieces. Rising to a height of 374 feet, it's said to be the tallest structure in the state when it was completed in 1964. But now it sits at number 11, still the tallest in Huntsville. In that area right down there with a little semicircular pad, not the tall building, it's kind of up in those trees there. You see that little pad there behind it? That is Test Stand 116, which is still in use today for smaller scale studies on high pressure and cryogenic propellants. And they're building something right there, it looks like. They're getting ready to clear it out. If you look at the satellite maps, which we'll do at the end, and you zoom in and out, they're building all kinds of stuff, because you can see, based on when the images were taken, how much stuff has been completed and not completed. Okay, you see that long building stretching through that little clearing in the trees right there? That belongs to the Army's Program Executive Office, or PEO for aviation. I couldn't uncover many specifics about what they're doing there, which is probably intentional, but they do have a Facebook page. Based on the photos I found there, it appears they have a lot of parties, for one thing, and are probably working primarily on rotorcraft and drones. When we check out the satellite map at the end, we'll even see they've got several of them on display down there, along with some helicopters, but you can't see them in the sim. There's two more big complexes up here. We can see both of them out of our side window right there. The one closest to us, which is the one on the right, is the Army Aviation and Missile Command. And that place handles life cycle management for missiles and unmanned vehicles, both aerial and ground-based, which I thought was interesting because you never hear much about autonomous stuff on the ground. And then that one over to the left is the Werner von Braun complex, and it seems like everyone is pretty tight-lipped about what's going on there too. Based on the very limited information I could find about it, I think that it's occupied by the Missile Defense Agency, who seems to be mostly concerned about high-altitude inbound threats, presumably hostile ICBMs. But that photogrammetry looks pretty good, and I'm not seeing really any blob trees out here either. That looks really good. I think the test stands were kind of rough just because there's so much scaffolding and stuff. That never does too well in the sim. And this mountain over here to our left is called Mankin Mountain, and there's some stuff up on top of it. I think it's private property right now, but it looks like they have an astronomical observatory, which you can't see here in the sim, I don't think, but you can definitely see it on the satellite map. And obviously they got some antennas or something up there, or some oil derricks. As we head up to the space camp, I'll just mention that, as always, this flight plan will be included in the video description, along with the bookmarks that we'll check out at the end. Looks like there's another little observatory down there in that opening. Some of those have to be weather radars, I bet, but you'd think they'd put that on top of that hill there. All that stuff there is part of the base. So we're flying along what would be the eastern edge of the base right now. And then over to our right is downtown Huntsville. So we're coming up on the highlight of this trip. We'll see two different spots up here, on-site learning experience destinations, the most famous of which is the iconic SpaceCamp, which made its way into the spotlight for my generation when the movie of the same name was released in 1986. And I will give a virtual fist bump to the first person who can tell me the name of the robot from that movie. I couldn't remember it, but that's the main thing I remember, is that little robot that was rolling around everywhere that wound up saving the crew when they went up to... And if you can also remember, it just struck me, I'm not going to say it, the name of the space station they were flying to. It just came to mind. I had to look up the name of that robot, though, so let me know if you know it off the top of your head. I'll give you a shout-out. But in addition to the space camp, they've also got a newer program, I think it's newer, called the Aviation Challenge, which is simulator-based and probably awesome. And that will be over to the right. We'll see that first. We'll circle right around the top of that, and then look at the space camp. They do have some static stuff on display outside of the aviation experience, too. Quite a bit of it, actually. Not space stuff, but it appears to be planes. We'll see if we can see any of that out here as we're coming around. But SpaceCamp first opened in 1982 and was the brainchild of America's favorite Nazi. And until this trip, I thought Mr. von Braun was just an opportunist, one of those go along to get along kind of guys. But after looking into that, I read that he was actually an officer in the SS, a junior officer. But who's going to split hairs when the moon's up there staring us down night after defiant night? Get him over here. But for what we're doing here, the coolest part about this area is not what's inside the space camp, but what they have on display outdoors, including at the Aviation Challenge, which we'll see if we can spy that. Of course, we'll see the huge rockets at the space camp. The main facility for that place, the space camp, has, among other things, both a V1 and V2 rocket, a full-scale Saturn V, and a fully assembled, albeit horizontally positioned, space shuttle, complete with boosters and the external tank. But the shuttle isn't one they ever launched. It's called the Pathfinder, which is a proportionally accurate model they built before they built any of the real space shuttles that they used to test the dimensions of all the stuff they would later use to store and transport, the real deal, once they built it. Alright, you see that little pond down there right in the corner? That's where the Aviation Challenge is. They got like a little shed or building or hangar or something down there, and I'm just looking to see if we can see any planes down there next to it. And you can see the Saturn V sticking up at the space camp there a little bit further. Oh, I think we can see one tiny little plane on this side of that little white shed-like building by the pond there. They got quite a few of them down there. We'll check it out when we're done. Inside the facility for the space camp, they've got the original gangway that was used to board the Apollo rockets on the pad, the real Apollo 16 command module, some moon rocks, and also the original Apollo 12 quarantine trailer, where they stuck the guys when they came back, just in case they had any moon diseases. And for all the adrenaline junkies, they have a simulator that lets visitors experience what a launch is like up through 4 Gs and then a few seconds of weightlessness. I don't know how they do the 0G part, but I'd sure love to find out. And then they got another thing that swings you all around to feel spatial disorientation. I'd probably skip that one. I think that was in that SpaceCamp movie too. It looks like a vomit machine. Alright, so you see that thing to the left, closest to us? It looks like a little oval-shaped or egg-shaped top building. The space shuttle is just to the right of that. We'd be looking up the nozzles on the back of it right now. We'll see if we can see it from the side. I can see it because I got closer and looked at it, but we really can't see the profile of it from here. We'll take another look as we come around. And they've also got a few capsule mock-ups from all the different rockets you can climb in just to see how cramped things were in real life. There's the big Saturn V rocket sticking up there. You can definitely see that with that red thing down at the bottom. Okay, can we see the space shuttle? It's hard to see. That's it, just on this side of that oval-shaped white building. You can kind of see the vertical stabilizer sticking up there. If you have a really big screen, you can probably make it out. And last but not least, they've got the gravesite of Miss Baker down there. She was a squirrel monkey they sent up on a Jupiter rocket in 1959, taking up permanent residence here from 1971 until she died in 1984 at the age of 27. Meaning she was just 2 when she got to take the ride of her life, which I'm sure wasn't the least bit traumatizing. Okay, so I cut the power. I'm going to see if this wind's going to blow us over. Our runway's right down there to the left. Oh, it's not doing as much this time. On my last flight, as soon as I cut the power, it just started moving right over to the right. Well, we get a little bit of drift there. And we're at 2,500 feet. We need to come way down. I think the runway is probably at around 1,000 or so. We'll make it. Don't worry. This thing is so slow, and once we turn into that headwind again, we might start going backwards. But they said that Miss Baker was the oldest known squirrel monkey in the world when she died. So whatever she went through with that little trip up to space must not have been that bad. So as we make our way over to our destination airport, which I'll tell you about in just a minute, I'll give you the scoop on the rest of Huntsville, which isn't much. For one thing, I was shocked to discover that its meager population of around 215,000 today makes it the largest city in the state. The greater metro area has roughly 520,000, which brings it to number 2 behind probably either Birmingham or Montgomery, I would guess. And I bet you can probably figure out what the big economic driver is out here. They do have another university, part of the University of Alabama. And they, of course, specialize in technology at this one. I did find a list of famous people born here, but the only name I recognized was Paula Poundstone, speaking of the 1980s. Which should tell you a lot about the rest of that list. And other than having a lot of craft beer companies, which could describe pretty much every city in the U.S. these days, the only fun facts I could dig up involved everything that we've already seen. So I think we've covered just about all that this area has to offer. And if you think that's boring, don't plan any trips to Jacksonville, because there's nothing going on out here where I live. Although we do have St. Augustine, which is probably our big claim to fame. Alright, runway, where are you? It's kind of hard to see it through all this haze. That's it, right down there in our little triangle window there. So I'm just trying to get the right approach here. I think we're going to have some problems with this. It's going to be almost a crosswind coming in here. We'll see how we do. On my last flight, it was almost a direct headwind, which made it very, very easy, but I was hoping to try to pull off a 2-point landing. We'll see how that goes. I don't think we're going to be able to with this crosswind like it is now. And the destination is the Redstone Army Airfield, which opened in 1943 to test incendiary cluster bombs. And it was abandoned after the war and sat there minding its own business until 1956, when the city asked the Army if they could plant a control tower out here until they could build a new airport. And the Army agreed, and they cleaned it up and started using it again for government flights in and out of the R&D facility. One interesting little sidebar about the base itself. As I was Googling around for info, I found a local news article from last week detailing an ongoing issue they're having with people bringing guns on the property. They said it's not the roughly 700 military personnel they got stationed out here, but the more than 50,000 civilian contractors coming and going every day. They said they've arrested 100 people in the last 2 years for illegal firearms possession. Fortunately, it's just a misdemeanor and a little fine, but they said quite a few were people who just got lost and accidentally wound up at one of the checkpoints, which would be awful. I think they said the ticket was like $500, so I wouldn't want to deal with that. Unless you have some warrants or something, then you're in real trouble. But boy, that's getting really lost, and you'd think you'd see that checkpoint coming. But maybe not. It is awfully foggy out here. So I'm pretty sure we're going to have... Yep, there's another taxiway about halfway down the runway there, so we'll try to hit that. I'm going to fly past the aiming point just a little bit, because this thing will get slowed down pretty quick. And we'll see if we can pull off a 2-point landing here. Let's trim it up just a little bit. There we go. And again, the stall speed on this thing is almost a dead stop. So you can get real slow with this bad boy. I just can't get over how good these fields look. If it wasn't for the blob trees up close, but we really didn't have that many of them on this flight. Oh boy, here comes that wind. Alright, so I'm going to have to crab this a little bit and fly into the wind. 22 knot crosswind here. Alright, this is going to be quite a challenge. Look at that windsock down there. But I need to get slow is the problem. Oh boy. Alright, so I'm just going to let it blow me over here. Try to get past the aiming point. Okay, yep, I can see that taxiway down there. We'll just stay a little bit higher so I don't have to taxi too far down the runway here. Let's see if we can two-point it. I'm going to see how slow I can get before the wheels get down. Now, that wind is going to be an issue. That is going to be an issue. There we go. Come on, stay over the center. And the gusting is the real problem. Alright, come over. Let it blow me over. Blow me on over. We gotta get down under 50 kilometers an hour. Oh! Alright, keep that nose up. Oh yeah, we're gonna hop. This is good. Okay, once we're down, look at that. The tail just stays right up. Alright, I've got almost full left rudder right now. Keeping this thing pointed down the runway. That was awesome. I'm going to keep the tail up even when we get off the runway here. There we go. Alright, there we go. Now we give it some back pressure. I think there's a little guy over here that'll park us, but we're not going to drive around looking for him. We'll just pull up by this hangar over here, shut her down, and take a quick look at little nav map, and it will definitely be quick, because there's not much to see out here. I'll give you a little more close-up view of some of the stuff that's worth checking out, especially the planes they have on display at some of those locations. See what else we can spot down there. But that was a neat flight. Thanks for coming along. As soon as my client told me about that, I had completely forgotten that place was out here. And honestly, if you would have even asked me where is the space camp until yesterday, I probably wouldn't have been able to tell you. Yep, there's our parking guy. Sorry, buddy, we're going to park over here. Okay, we'll cut the mags. Let's just hit the fuel first. That'll do the trick. I wonder if we open the door, if we can get back out. Let's see. Oh, I can't even open it from the inside. Alright, that's cool. Alright. You know, I'm kind of thinking I forgot to shut it once we got in, because you do have to shut it, but I guess the wind would have slammed it shut. That would have been our reminder. Okay, so here's where we left from. Check this runway out. 12,588 feet by 150 feet. I mean, it's not the longest, but I think this is one of the longest in the southeastern U.S. I bet Atlanta has some pretty long ones, too. So we took off from here and head on over to Redstone, and there's the old Tennessee River winding through there. And the first thing we saw was test stand 4670. And here's where that deflector shoots everything off. And again, that's 700 feet right there. So maybe with the smaller rockets, they'd be okay, but you'd think a Saturn V engine would just be blowing like... I hope it would blow out to here. That'd be cool. They got all the tanks and everything out there. Boy, kind of a mess right now, though. Getting everything ready for old Jeff Bezos' stuff. And there's the building where Werner von Braun was doing his thing with his crew down there. The one they're going to put the 1960s furniture in. Here's the dynamic test stand, which looked amazing. You can even see some of the rust on it on the top right there. That's great. That's where they were trying to shake the things to pieces. And then here was that little smaller one. Again, I don't know what this huge thing right here was. We could definitely see that, but it was not labeled either here or on the Google Maps. And I tried to find just a map of the complex to see if that had any names on it, but I couldn't find anything that told us what that was. But here's the one where they're testing the high-pressure engines and the cryogenic stuff. And that one is about, I think, 500 feet from those trees. And obviously, since they're still using that one, they've got it figured out. So I guess they're not blowing trees away, which is too bad. Here's the FBI building, which you can tell they are very recently working on. Because if you zoom out, it's not even as complete as it is now. And in the sim, it looked like it was completely complete because you couldn't see all this red dirt anywhere. It looks like they put grass and stuff down. And here's the PEO Aviation Center, and here's the one that does have some stuff outside of it that we couldn't see in the sim, so that looks like a drone to me. That's pretty small. A Chinook, you gotta have a Chinook. Not sure what that is. I really can't tell from here. That looks like a drone. Look how tiny that little thing is. Anything over there? Nope. That's probably an Apache. Maybe some Cobras down there. That's so cool. Oh, and another... looks like a tiny... Can we get any closer? That looks really small, whatever that is, but it looks like a rotorcraft of some kind. Amazing. And then here's the two buildings. This is the one where they are doing the life cycle control of the unmanned aerial and ground-based vehicles. And then here is where they've got the missile defense complex. What they're doing in there, I couldn't figure out. The von Braun complex. And here's that big hill. Look, let's see if we can see that observatory. Look at that. Right there. That's definitely an observatory. That's probably... Oh, it's up on top of a big... They usually don't build water towers with that scaffolding underneath it, so I'm wondering if that's like a weather radar. It might be. And these are obviously communication antennas of some kind, I would bet. Okay, and then we came up here. Boy, I was trying to stay closer to this line here, but look, that wind was just cruising us over there. Still 14 knots on the ground. And here's the aviation challenge area where all the sim stuff is. Look at all these planes they have out here. Oh man, and some rockets. Yep, very nice. What is that, a Tomcat? That looks like... What kind of missile is that? Looks like the kind you put on a sub, like the Poseidons or Tridents. Is that what they call those? Another helicopter. They got a plane waving at us. Oh, and check this out. You can only tell because you can see the shadow of the helicopter up there. That looks like a Huey, doesn't it? And it looks like it's on top of an oil rig or something. You just can't tell looking down on the top of it. That's very cool. And then we come over here, and here's where the space shuttle... Oh, and look at that. It's missing. The actual space shuttle is missing, so they must have had it pulled away for this shot because they were refurbishing it, which I think they just, again, brought it back recently after getting it all cleaned up, the Pathfinder. Anything else over here? Man, lots of just junk everywhere. As soon as you get off the beaten path, that's where they got all the crud stored. So they got an Atlas rocket here. Another Chinook, of course. Let's see. There's the old Honest John. Let's see if we can get closer. And it looks like this might be, they got it with craters and stuff, that might be a moonlander they got right there. I'm sure that's not the original. They wouldn't have that sitting outside. And then here's the Saturn rocket, which you can only tell is a rocket because you can see that huge shadow. And then we came on in. Very cool, guys. Very cool flight. So a couple more places that are kind of on my radar right now to check out. We'll see what we wind up doing next, but I'm sure it's going to be awesome. As always, I had an absolute blast, learned all kinds of amazing things once again, and I cannot wait to see you all again in the skies. Later.